The Economics of Fallen Empires. The 2026 Analysis. Look at the globe in 2026, and a single superpower seems to cast a shadow over every other nation. The United States appears at first glance to be an immovable titan. It maintains a military apparatus unparalleled in the history of our species, with hundreds of outposts, dotting nearly every continent. Its war chest is deeper than the combined spending of its 10 closest rivals. It holds the keys to the global counting house through the dollar, the currency in which the world's energy is priced, and its savings are stored. From the software in your pocket to the curriculum in elite lecture halls, American influence is the very definition of the modern world. It presents itself as the peak of industrial democracy, the one nation the world cannot live without. But this facade is cracking here at the economic of fallen empires. We look past the surface to see the structural rot, to grasp the reality of the situation. You must look away from the gleaming carrier decks and the soaring tech stocks. You have to peer into the machine's engine room. Strip away the legends of Silicon Valley and the might of the Pentagon and focus on the ledger. What you'll find isn't a thriving, productive powerhouse. You'll find a hollowed-out shell, a speculative casino that relies on a single fading global advantage. Pay attention to this figure, 58%. That is the share of global reserves held in greenbacks today. It was 71% at the turn of the millennium and 85% in the late 70s. The dollar's reign as the world's undisputed king is fading. Most people living within its borders fail to realize that their entire existence, their standard of living, and the very survival of their nation is perched precariously on the ability to manufacture money for a world that needs it when that necessity vanishes. And the projections suggest we hit the wall within the next decade. The American era will and just fade. It will disintegrate with the same jarring violence that claimed the Soviet Union in 1991. Today's America bears no resemblance to the industrial giant that built the arsenal of democracy. It has become a financialized ghost that abandoned the factory floor for the trading floor. It is a nation that shuttered its workshops to open hedge funds, creating a landscape where a tiny fraction of the elite captured nearly all economic growth over 40 years, while the working class watched their purchasing power evaporate. This is an empire held together by ink and paper, not steel and ingenuity, and the rest of the world is currently walking away from the printing press. The United States is currently boxed in the federal ledger, hasn't seen a surplus in a quarter of a century. Its manufacturing capabilities have withered to the point of a developing nation. The population is tethered to a diet of inexpensive foreign imports and government stimulus. Any attempt to actually fix the productive engine would now trigger a catastrophic depression. Meanwhile, the architects of this system, the elites who cycle through the revolving doors of Wall Street and Washington, are shielded from the fallout. They've transformed the government from a neutral arbiter into a subsidiary of the financial sector. But there is a fatal flaw in running a paper empire. When the world is seeking tangible value elsewhere, eventually the illusion shatters. When it does, half a century of debt and imbalance will correct itself in a matter of years. America is the sick man of the 21st century, and its fall is imminent. It won't be brought down by foreign armies, but by the cold, hard logic of mathematics. You cannot engineer a global hegemony through accounting tricks forever. To understand this descent into a fragile financial state, we have to revisit the moment the foundation first buckled in 1971. The post-war economic order was screaming under pressure. For decades, the dollar was tethered to gold at $35 an ounce, giving the world a reason to trust it. But Washington had printed far more paper than it had gold in the vaults by 71. The mountain of gold that once stood at 20,000 tons had shriveled to almost nothing. America was on the verge of bankruptcy. President Nixon was forced into a corner, either face a total currency collapse or break the gold promise. On a Sunday afternoon in August, he went on air and temporarily ended the dollar's link to gold that was over half a century ago. The link was never restored. In that instant, the world entered an era of pure fiat currency money backed by nothing. But the hope that America would stay on top forever. Normally, this would have ended the dollar's status. Why hold paper with no intrinsic value? But the use had a final gambit. The petrodollar, by striking a deal with the House of Saud. The use ensured that every barrel of oil on earth would be sold only for dollars in exchange. The U.S. military would protect the Saudi throne. It was a stroke of genius because it created a forced artificial demand for the dollar. Central banks didn't need gold anymore. They needed dollars to keep the lights on and the trucks moving. This allowed America to export its inflation. We could print money to buy real goods from other nations, and they had to take it. This is the exorbitant privilege that has funded the empire since the 70s, but that privilege requires a bodyguard. That role was filled by two pillars: the military-industrial complex and the financial elite. If you want to know who truly directs the fate of a nation, look at the incestuous pipeline between the massive investment banks and the Treasury Department. It is a financial oligarchy that has effectively hijacked the state. Look at the roster of Treasury secretaries over the last 30 years. Reuben Paulson Notchen, all former high-ranking executives or partners at Goldman Sachs. This isn't a democratic process, it's a closed loop. These individuals share the same zip codes, the same elite universities, and the same fundamental religion, that the movement of money is more important than the making of things. Let's look at what this financialization actually looks like. In the 1950s, the financial sector was a small supporting player in the economy, making up about 25%. Its job was simple: provide loans to help businesses build things. Today, that sector has ballooned to over 21% of the economy. Finance is now larger than manufacturing. The nation now generates more wealth by shuffling paper than by creating products. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of decades of systematic deregulation, pushed by the revolving door elite. They convinced the world that banks could regulate themselves, a fantasy that led to the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999. This tore down the wall between safe consumer banking and high-stakes gambling. The result? Banks became massive opaque casinos. They used the savings of ordinary citizens to place trillion-dollar bets on complex financial products no one truly understood. By 2008, the 6 largest banks held assets equal to over 60% of the national GDP. They became too big to fail, which is just another way of saying they were given a license to take infinite risks at the taxpayer's expense. When the housing market imploded, the government didn't punish. The gamblers that bailed them out with trillions in emergency loans. The very people who caused the crash were the ones tasked with fixing it. Not a single major executive went to prison. The message was clear: the house always wins. While the coastal elites saw their wealth compound, the rest of the country was being gutted. Between 1980 and today, the manufacturing core of the nation was sliced in half. We traded high-paying factory jobs for low-wage service roles. Wall Street discovered that it was more profitable to strip a company of its assets and move production to China than it was to invest in long-term growth. If a CEO focused on his workers, his stock would move slowly. If he fired half the staff and used the savings for stock buybacks, he'd get a massive bonus. The system optimized for short-term gains at the cost of national sovereignty. This loss of industry isn't just an economic issue, it's a security crisis. When the world faced a pandemic in 2020, the wealthiest nation on earth couldn't even produce its own masks or medical supplies. We had to plead with China, our primary geopolitical rival, for basic equipment. Even the Pentagon now admits it is dangerously dependent on foreign adversaries for the minerals and chips required for its own weapons. We traded our ability to be self-sufficient for a cheap television and a soaring stock market. And now the bill for that trade is coming due. The second pillar of the trap is the inescapable mountain of debt. The U.S. has spent more than it earned for 24 consecutive years. We've gone from $5 trillion in debt to over $36 trillion in just over 2 decades. But the real horror is the interest. We are now spending nearly $1 trillion a year just to service the debt we already have. Within a few years, interest payments will be the largest single expense in the federal budget, surpassing even the military. This is the debt spiral. There are no easy exits. You can default and watch the world burn. You can attempt austerity and face civil unrest. Or you can print money and destroy the currency. The United States has chosen the third path. Inflation. By flooding the system with new money, the government devalues the debt. If you live on a paycheck, you're being liquidated. And here at the Economic of Fallen Empires, we see that this entire scheme only works if the world continues to use the dollar. But the world is waking up. Nations are moving their reserves into gold and local currencies at a record pace. Your money is unsafe in our banks. From China and Russia to India and Brazil, the world is building a parallel financial system. The petrodollar is dying, and with it the American cheat code for endless spending is being revoked. This isn't a theory. It's the same path the British pound took in the mid-20th century. But today information moves at the speed of light, and the collapse will be far swifter without the ability to print the world's money. The U.S. The dollar's dominance is effectively over. Inflation will become a permanent fixture of life. A military giant with a hollowed-out productive base led by an elite class that is completely insulated from the reality of its people. They won't see it coming until the day the system simply stops functioning. So how do you navigate the end of an era? You cannot stop the macro trends, but you can prepare for the fallout. They are investing in real-world skills that provide value regardless of the state of the financial markets. In a world of paper illusions, the only things that matter are the things you can touch, the things you can grow, and the people you can trust. Is the American era still alive? On the surface, yes. The carriers are still in the water, and the nukes are still in the silos. The Economic of Fallen Empires exists to document these shifts before they become headlines. The Soviet Union looked like a permanent fixture of the world until the very moment it vanished. The math says America is on the same trajectory.